So as the death toll mounts, the casualties mount, and the bombings continue, the big question, is there an end game to the war in West Asia? Joining me now is a special guest, Trita Parsi. Is an Iranian-born Swedish writer and political analyst. He's Executive Vice President at the Quincy Institute. Appreciate your joining us, Mr. Parsi. It's very interesting. You've tweeted today after the Donald Trump presser suggesting that there were two key objectives the American president had: calm the markets and prepare the ground for ending the war through a unilateral declaration of victory. But the Secretary of Defense, Mr. Hegseth, seems to suggest that the bombings will only intensify on Iran. So do you see this conflict ending soon?
No, I don't think the conflict will be ending soon. And I think what Trump was trying to do was to essentially calm the markets, because he's very sensitive to the global markets, particularly oil prices. It has a profound impact on global inflation and US inflation, which has a direct political consequence in the US, while at the same time trying to intensify the war so that he can declare a victory before his own base turns against his war. However, even if he declares victory, even if he were to withdraw militarily from the region, it does not mean that the Iranians are going to end the war. The Iranians are likely going to continue the war until they believe that they have reached a point in which the United States and Israel are not likely to restart the war because the cost has been too high on them, as well as getting some sort of a sanctions relief that enables Iran not to be in a state of continuous weakening after the war has ended. Because if it ends right now, Iran will be in a state of continuous weakening because of the lack of sanctions relief. And that continuous weakening will prompt Israel and the United States to attack Iran again, because it's precisely the perception of Iranian weakness that gave the US and Israel the idea that there was an opportunity to strike.
So two things come from what you've said. A, you're saying the war is unlikely to end soon. B, you seem to suggest that it's unlikely that Iran will see the kind of regime change that Israel, if not the US, wants. Am I broadly correct?
Yes, I mean, right now we don't see any signs of that at all. The theory behind this was that the US would be taking out a lot of the state's repressive capabilities, IRGC, Basij, and that people would rise up. We're not seeing any signs of that. If anything, we're starting to see increasing signs of nationalism and rallying around the flag, particularly after Trump talks about arming separatist Kurds, after he's attacking the Iranian nation by saying that all Iranians are horrible people. It is no longer focused on the regime, as well as the fact that you have these attacks against desalination plants, oil refineries, power plants, that are not an attack on the state's repressive capabilities, but is an attack on Iran as a whole. Trump even said that he thinks that Iran's map may not look the same way after this war. This is fueling nationalism and the belief that Trump is seeking the dismemberment of Iran.
And we've run a story today about the schools and the manner in which the school bombing has also evoked a strong sense of anger in Iran. You believe the longer this war continues, if anything, Iranian nationalism will be spurred even more. Am I correct?
I believe so, because we've already seen that the United States has lost control over the war, and it is only trying to inflict as much destruction as possible, rather than actually inflicting damage in areas that are strategic. Instead, it's just going for all-out suffering. It thinks that the sound of explosions will cover up the fact that the US no longer has a strategy.
But what about Iran? Does Iran really have a strategy when Iran targets Gulf states, continues to pound missiles in many places around Iran? Do you believe Iran also has a strategy? If US has gone into this war without a strategy, does Iran have a strategy?
The US did not go in without a strategy. It had a plan A, and the plan A was that Iran would collapse within 4 days. That plan A has crashed down, and it doesn't have a replacement. The Iranians had a strategy from the outset, and they're sticking to it, which is they are doing everything they can to increase the cost of this war, not just on the US, but on everyone. These attacks against the GCC states are aimed at striking US bases, US personnel, but also the global economy. The strikes against the Strait of Hormuz is about choking the global economy and making sure that the inflation goes up and that the cost simply becomes too high for everyone. The Iranians are looking for the most accessible pain point. It is not Israeli casualties. Israeli casualty tolerance is much too high. It's not even American casualties. It is the global economy. And that strategy that you pointed out is very well thought through, maybe completely immoral. And it is also, it should be said that many of these states in the GCC had worked very hard to prevent this war. They're still getting bombed. But this is a strategy that the Iranians have chosen because they are clearly in a weaker position. So they have to go towards the weakest pain point that they can identify.
Does Israel have a clear strategy, or is Israel still under Netanyahu hell-bent on dismantling the Iranian state?
Well, that is the Israeli strategy. I think the Israelis are the biggest winners so far. The Israelis are very content. It doesn't matter to the Israelis if the next supreme leader is named Moshtaba, Hassan, or Ali. That's of no particular importance to them. What's important to them is that as much as possible of Iran's military and state capability and economic capability is destroyed. They want to make sure that Iran is set back 10, 15, perhaps 20 years, so that the balance of power in the region shifts in Israel's direction. And so that even though Iran will continue to have missile capabilities and will continue to be able to strike and deter Israel to a certain extent, it will nevertheless be set back so far that the Israelis won't have to think about doing this again for another 10 to 15 years. That is absolutely being achieved. It's America's objectives that are not being achieved.
But then what is the end game, and who decides the end game? You seem to suggest that Donald Trump could unilaterally one day wake up and declare victory. Do you believe Trump will end this war? Who ends this war? What is the end game?
This is the fallacy that Trump has fallen under, to believe that he can just unilaterally decide when this war ends. I think he would like to end it at some point in which he just declares victory, even if many of his objectives have not been achieved. But again, as I said earlier on, the Iranians have a vote in this as well, and so do the Israelis. Even if the Iranians and the Americans were to come to an agreement on some form of an end to this war, that I think would have to contain some sort of a sanctions relief for the Iranians as well. They won't accept it otherwise. That does not mean that the Israelis stop. The Israelis still have the ability to sabotage any type of an agreement between the US and Iran until Trump decides that he is willing to tell the Israelis no. So far, he has not. He's just gone along with what the Israelis have wanted, and he is in a terrible situation as a result.
But, you've got a Donald Trump, therefore, who, publicly says it's more fun to sink ships. Here is someone completely, if I maybe use the word amoral, some of his comments, frankly, from an Indian perspective, grotesque in the way there is absolutely no compassion, empathy. So Trump is not going to change. Given all that, where do we stand, Mr. Parsi, particularly, let's say, a month from now? If I'm interviewing you again, do you believe the war will still be raging?
I think there's a high chance and risk that the war will continue for another month. There's also a likelihood that because of economic pressure and because of pressure from other countries onto the United States to end this war, because the fact that many other countries, India, will pay a higher economic price much sooner than the US will. As I understand, some Indian schools are already being closed as a result of fuel shortages, etc. Unless that pressure from other countries who are paying the price for this, the Philippines, Bangladesh, and others, starts to actually channel towards Trump, then this can go on for a month. But if that pressure starts to mount and other countries are stepping in and pressuring all sides, the Iranians as well, to end this war, then we will see this war continue for quite some time. Other countries have a vote in this. It doesn't seem that many of them have realized it or are willing to...
Sure.
Go ahead.
My final question, therefore, to you, Mr. Parsi, what is your biggest takeaway from the last 11 days? What is it that has perhaps surprised you most in the last 11 days, and what worries you the most?
I'm not surprised that we are in this situation. I am surprised that the Iranians escalated vis-a-vis the GCC states so quickly. But I'm not surprised that we're in this situation. I wrote before all of this that this is all based on a massive miscalculation sold to the Trump administration by the Israelis, saying that Iran is so weak, he has no choice but to surrender. That is absolutely not the case, and as we see the result of that right now. My biggest worry is that this goes on for weeks and months, and that it will not only destroy much of the Iranian state, but much of the global economy. And we will see massive refugee flows out of Iran. If just 10% of the Iranian population flee, similar to what we saw in Syria, we're talking about 9 million people, most of them going towards Europe.
Okay, let's leave it there. Trita Parsi, I appreciate you joining us and doing some plain speaking on where the war stands as we speak. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you.